The morning sun over Camp Pendleton was weak, barely cutting through the thick coastal haze. For Master Sergeant Elara Vance, the chill in the air had nothing to do with the weather. It was the feeling of being an outsider again, a sensation she thought she'd left behind on the battlefields of Afghanistan and the halls of the Pentagon. She stepped off the shuttle bus, her single duffel bag slung over one shoulder, and looked around at the familiar yet foreign landscape of a Marine Corps base. Her new uniform felt stiff, the fabric crisp, and the new rank insignia sewn on her sleeves still holding their factory crease. She was a woman in her late 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that had seen too much and a posture carved from a decade and a half of discipline. She was also a woman walking into one of the most traditionally male-dominated environments in the world, a Marine infantry battalion. Her orders were clear. She was here for a 6-month special assignment, a Joint Training and Integration Program. Her official role was a liaison, but her unofficial purpose was to observe and advise on tactical logistics. The Marines, however, didn't know the full scope of her background. To them, she was just another REMF, a rear echelon motherfucker, from some joint command, probably an admin type or a personnel specialist sent to observe and make reports that would gather dust. The battalion headquarters building was a low-slung utilitarian structure. As she walked towards it, she passed a group of young Marines cleaning a 7-ton truck. Their conversation stopped as she approached, then resumed in low, mocking tones. She caught the tail end of a whispered joke, the words "Pog," person other than Grunt, and Chairborne Ranger floating on the breeze. She kept her eyes forward, her expression neutral. This wasn't new. She'd been the only woman in countless rooms, on countless patrols. And she'd learned long ago that reactions were a currency she didn't have to spend. Inside, she was directed to the office of the battalion commander, Colonel Morrison. He was a career infantryman, a man whose face was a roadmap of hard campaigns. He was polite, professional, but distant. He introduced her to the battalion sergeant major, a mountain of a man named Williams, whose handshake was a brief, bone-crushing test of will. He looked her up and down with open skepticism. "Master Sergeant," he said, the rank sounding almost like an accusation. "We've got your workspace set up in the S3 shop. The Major will get you squared away." The S3 operations shop was a beehive of controlled chaos. Maps covered the walls, radios crackled, and the air smelled of coffee, bad printer toner, and anxious energy. Major Thompson, the operations officer, was a harried man in his early 40s. He gave her a curt nod and pointed to a small, cluttered desk in the corner, piled high with old field manuals and forgotten coffee cups. "That's you," he said, not unkindly, but with the air of someone who had more important things to deal with. "Get yourself sorted. The guys are heading to the field next week for a live-fire exercise. You'll be observing." She spent the first few days in a state of near invisibility. The young captains and lieutenants in the shop would fall silent when she entered, and then resume their conversations about training schedules and ammunition allocations, pointedly excluding her. At the chow hall, she ate alone, a silent island in a sea of green uniforms. The whispers were constant. She heard the words "diversity hire" and "quota" more than once. One young staff sergeant, a fire-breathing type named Kozlowski, made a point of blocking her path in the hallway, forcing her to step aside, a small daily act of dominance. The worst was outside of work, and the barracks and the base housing areas had a social ecosystem that was brutally efficient. As the only senior enlisted woman in the battalion's immediate orbit, she was a subject of endless speculation. She'd overhear fragments of conversations at the PX. "Did you see the new master sergeant in 1st Battalion? Yeah, the woman. Wonder what she's here for. Must be a paperwork pusher." The assumptions were always the same. She couldn't possibly be a real operator. She was an interloper. See, a political appointee, a problem to be managed. One afternoon, she was reviewing a logistics plan at her desk. Kozlowski and a few other staff NCOs were huddled around a large terrain model of the training area, planning the upcoming exercise. They were talking loudly, their language coarse, their jokes juvenile. It was a performance, and she was the audience. "All right, so, 3rd Platoon will be the assault element. They'll move through this wadi here," Kozlowski said, pointing with a stick. We'll have the simulated Op-4, opposing force, right here. Should be a good target-rich environment." One of the other sergeants snickered. Target-rich. Sounds like the O Club on a Friday night. They all laughed, a harsh barking sound. Kozlowski glanced over his shoulder at Alara, a smug look on his face. He then turned back to his buddies and said, in a voice clearly meant to carry, "Yeah, well, at least in the field, the only thing we have to worry about is the enemy shooting back. Not some REMF with a clipboard telling us we're using the wrong color pen on our op orders." The others chuckled, a few shooting her smirks. Alara felt a familiar cold anger coil in her stomach. It wasn't the crude humor that bothered her. She'd heard worse in forward operating bases. It was the utter dismissal of her professional existence. She was being reduced to a nuisance before she'd even been given a chance to prove otherwise. She took a slow, measured breath, focusing on the supply manifest in front of her. But her knuckles were white where she gripped the paper. She wasn't here to make friends. She was here to do a job. But she knew, with a certainty born of hard experience, that she couldn't do it from the corner of this room. Something had to change. The days bled into a week, and the quiet animosity didn't fade. It calcified. Alara felt like a ghost haunting the battalion headquarters, present but unseen, acknowledged only as an object of curiosity or scorn. The isolation was a familiar foe, one she knew how to fight. So she stopped waiting for an invitation. She started doing her job. The upcoming live fire exercise was a complex, multi-company operation. The plans on the wall were impressive, but Ilara's trained eye, honed by years of coordinating joint airstrikes and managing logistics in active combat zones, spotted gaps immediately. The ammunition resupply plan was optimistic at best, and a logistical house of cards waiting for the first gust of real-world friction. The casualty evacuation, CASEVAC plan, relied on a single unsecured landing zone that would be under direct observation from the mock enemy positions. In a real fight, that LZ would be a kill box. She brought her concerns to Major Thompson. He listened, his expression a mask of professional courtesy that barely concealed his impatience. He glanced at her notes, a series of red-penned marks on his masterful plan. "Me, Master Sergeant, I appreciate the input," he said, his tone suggesting he appreciated it about as much as a root canal. "But these plans have been vetted by my staff. The ammunition numbers are based on the standard rate of expenditure, and we've run this CASEVAC drill a dozen times. It's solid." "Sir, with respect, the standard rate of expenditure is for a linear known fight. In an urban assault simulation with a dug-in Op-4, your first-hour expenditure will be double that. You'll burn through your pre-staged ammo and have a critical lag before the follow-on resupply can reach the line companies. And that LZ," she pointed to the map, her finger tapping the exact spot. "It's a bowl. The ridgelines provide perfect overwatch. Any bird coming in will be a sitting duck." The major's jaw tightened. He was not used to being second-guessed by a new arrival, especially one he still mentally categorized as an outsider. "I'll take it under advisement," he said, effectively ending the conversation. Alara knew what that meant. It meant nothing. The snubs continued, growing sharper. Kozlowski, emboldened by the major's dismissal, became more blatant. He'd accidentally leave her off distribution lists for important emails. He'd correct her on minor points of Marine Corps terminology in front of junior Marines, implying she was ignorant of their ways. The harassment wasn't physical, but it was constant, from the low-grade warfare of exclusion and disrespect designed to grind her down. Then came the breaking point. It was the evening before the battalion was set to move to the field. Ilara was in the motor pool, doing a final check on the communications vehicle she was slated to use. It was dark, the only light coming from the harsh fluorescent floods high above. She was running a diagnostic on the long-range radio when she heard the scuff of boots on concrete. Kozlowski and two of his cronies, Sergeants Miller and Jenkins, appeared from between two 7-ton trucks. They were clearly coming from the nearby enlisted club, the smell of beer hanging around them like a cloud. They stopped when they saw her. "Well, look who it is," Kozlowski drawled, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "The ghost of the S3 shop. What's the matter, Master Sergeant? Lost your way to the admin office?" Miller and Jenkins snickered, their postures aggressive. The kind of body language men use when they're in a pack and feel invincible. Ilara straightened up from the radio, her movements slow and deliberate. She met Kozlowski's gaze. "I'm checking my comms gear for tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Kozlowski scoffed, stepping closer. He was a big man, and he used his size to try and intimidate. "What, you think you're coming to the field with us? We're going to be running and gunning. It's going to be hot and dirty. Not exactly a place for, well, you know." He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung in the air, heavy and ugly. Not a place for a woman. Jenkins, the younger of the two, piped up. "Yeah, you'll be safer back here in the rear with the gear. Wouldn't want you to break a nail." It was the final straw. It wasn't the first time she'd been dismissed, mocked, or underestimated, but this was different. This was on the eve of an operation, and their toxic masculinity was blinding them to real, tactical deficiencies in their plan. The frustration she'd been bottling up for 2 weeks, the anger at being treated as less than nothing, began to surface. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but it cut through the cavern like a shard of ice. "You know, Staff Sergeant, you're right. It is going to be hot and dirty, and when you and your men are pinned down in that wadi because your assault element ran dry on 5.56, I'll be the one calling in the 81mm mortar support to cover your ass. And when your corpsman gets hit trying to drag a Marine to that death trap of an LZ your major signed off on, I'll be the one coordinating the emergency extract from the leeward side of the ridge. A ridge I pointed out 3 days ago." Her words were precise, clinical, and devastating. Kozlowski blinked, the alcohol-fueled bravado momentarily faltering. She hadn't shouted or cursed, and she had simply outlined his own potential failure, his own death, with chilling accuracy. For a second, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. But it was just a flicker. The pack mentality reasserted itself. He took another step forward, getting into her personal space. The smell of beer was strong. "You think you're something special, don't you? You think those little ribbons on your chest make you a real Marine? Let me tell you something, sweetheart. In this battalion, you're nothing. You're a quota, a mistake. And tomorrow, when the guns start firing, you're going to be in the way." The word sweetheart hung in the air, a detonation. The cold anger in Ilara's stomach turned to something else, a calm, focused resolve. She looked him dead in the eye. "I suggest you step back, Staff Sergeant." "Or what?" he sneered. "You'll write me up? Go run and tell the Sergeant Major? What are you going to do?" It was the perfect question. And for the first time since she'd arrived on base, she was going to give them a perfect answer. She reached into the neck of her uniform blouse and pulled out a chain she wore under her shirt. On it was a single, heavy dog tag. It wasn't the standard issue pair. It was a Special Operations Command tag, and stamped on it was a designation that made Kozlowski's eyes go wide. He squinted, reading it, his face slowly draining of its arrogant color. Yet the tag didn't say USMC, it said MARSOC, and beneath it, her name, and beneath that, a number he knew well, 0861. It was the military occupational specialty code for a fire support man, the men and women who act as the quarterback